Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at this ASEAN Climate Governance Network Forum. My name is Sunita Rajakumar, and I'm the Chairman of Climate Governance Malaysia. The ASEAN Climate Governance Network was launched on the 14th of February this year, very recently, and it was the first time all institutes of directors in the region have come together. These are directors volunteering to create this platform for the very important conversation on how to increase our collective climate resilience. This is part 2 of a series of 6 sessions. The first 2 sessions are about how the climate agenda is going to affect businesses, PLCs, and today SMEs. The next 2 sessions will be on directors' duties and governance, and the final 2 sessions will be about the banking sector and capital markets. There are high levels of dependency on the natural ecosystem. We are inextricably interconnected to nature, not only relying on it for our absolute survival, but almost all of our business activities are extractive of the environment. And many businesses are starting to demonstrate they are valuing ecosystem services. We are seeing this in business strategies, from ESG to SDGs to setting decarbonization targets, enhanced reporting and disclosure requirements, and of course, at the far end of the spectrum, operating within planetary boundaries. And to note that much of reporting and disclosure is about the impact of the environment on businesses, not about how businesses impact the environment. For example, the chemicals and microplastics that we are discharging into air and rivers. Industries all around the world are aligning with the direction of travel which society wants and needs. Exporting countries such as Malaysia and much of ASEAN are impoverishing countries when they extract from their environment and export to other countries. So there is tremendous momentum in the private sector to increase accountability. What was described as unpredictable yet entirely foreseeable risks arising from the climate emergency, including rain bombs leading to flash flooding in built environments, groundwater and soil movement leading to landslides, which we have recently witnessed. And many businesses and directors are recognizing we no longer have a choice. If we do not demonstrate the sustainability of our products and businesses, we will very likely reach the scenario where no one will want to invest in your business, no one will want to lend you money, no one will buy your products, and no one will want to work for you. Your staff and your competitors are willing to facilitate and drive change. And remember, innovations to embed sustainability into the DNA of the business will lead to a reduction in costs and create a strong competitive advantage. This will attract the types of people who want to work with you and thoughtful customers who are seeking such products and solutions. So it is critical for us to mainstream sustainability. And many businesses are also realizing they don't want their workforce to end up being their largest stranded asset. We have a wonderful panel lined up for you today, thanks to our partner, the Sustainable Finance Institute Asia, who have helped us curate and nominate the speakers and help us organize this. Thank you so much, Eugene and Nick from Sophia. In the meantime, let me hand you over to our moderator, Dominic Scriven, Chairman of Dragon Capital, and also from the Vietnam Institute of Directors. Over to you, Dominic.
Hey, thanks, Sunita, very much. Yes, I'm Dominic Scriven. I'm calling you, well, I'm beaming in here to this webinar from Ho Chi Minh City, where I have lived more or less for the last 30 years. My business is based in Vietnam. We invest in public companies through the markets. You know, the subject of this, of course, is not big companies. The subject of our discussion today is SMEs. So just to put a perspective out there, Vietnam is a population of 100 million people. There are 5 million household enterprises, 500,000 companies, and only 1,500 public companies. So we can see immediately that the universe of what we might describe as SMEs is vast, much, much bigger than that of the conventional medium, large size company. So I welcome the subject we're going to discuss today. Just picking up from some of Sunita's comments, let me first of all, of course, thank Climate Governance Malaysia and also Sustainable Finance Asia for pulling us all together today, and a warm welcome. We've got well over 50 people on the call so far. The format I suggest is that our three panelists will introduce themselves and perhaps talk a little bit about their perspective. One of the vastly interesting things that I think we can do today is have a wide-ranging, pretty open, pretty frank discussion of climate change in all its glory and its terror, from three very different perspectives. And I will let the relevant speakers, the relevant panelists, introduce their own perspective, but I much look forward to it. And we'll be approaching the discussion through a set of thematic issues that are relevant to climate change. Because of course, many of us think climate change can be put in a box and is a specific subject, but the harsh reality is that climate change touches everything. And in this discussion, I think we need to be clear that climate change, a lot of the debate has been over mitigation, that is, reducing the chances of climate change being severe. But in this part of the world, Southeast Asia, we are particularly exposed to the effects of climate change. And so we need to also remember adaptation, lower lying areas, salinated areas, storms, extreme heat. How are we going to deal with all of these, and how are we going to equip ourselves? So we have plenty of time, and I would very much hope that we might get some Q&A on the bottom of the screen, a Q&A button. We'll try and take questions as we can. But then let me just hand over for our three wonderful panelists, beginning with the letter L, followed by the letter M, and then lastly, but by no means least, the letter W. Over to you, Liping. And can I ask speakers to keep their mics open so we can keep the conversation going all the time? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for the introduction, and thank you so much to the ASEAN Climate Governance Network for inviting me, and Mr. Fier as well for inviting me to this session. First of all, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Liping. I'm a Malaysian. I'm currently based in Hong Kong, but I work with PwC, and my job really is to advise businesses and governments in the Asia Pacific region on climate change topic. I've been working on this area for close to 20 years, so I have seen quite a lot of changes in the last couple of decades on this topic. Now I'm going to start by making short remarks just to set a bit of a context. For those of you who have been following the UN Climate Change Summit would know that it was COP26 last November. So, governments have been talking about this for a quarter of a century, right? Those of you who follow the science would have seen that the IPCC recently released its sixth annual assessment report, which they do every 4 or 5 years. So another, quarter of a century, 30 years or so. So, scientists and businesses and governments have been, grappling with this issue for, close to 3 decades. And where does business come in? And I think the main thing that I've observed is that while there are few organizations, few businesses that are, trying to tackle this issue in the early days, where it's really, come on stream in terms of the business action has been more or less in the last 5 years or so, right? Late to the game. But having said that, I think if you kind of look back at some of the recent initiatives recent commitments that are made, whether it's at COP26 or the previous few COPs before that, there has been a significant uplift of especially the larger businesses committing to a number of initiatives, whether it's from deforestation to methane to phasing out coal. There have been a number of commitments, and notably these are from large businesses, and which brings in a little bit of today's context of we are talking in the sort of small and medium enterprise. And I think what I would like to touch on as we go into the conversation mode is 3 particular points. How does the smaller and medium enterprises fit into this current wave of large business action? So 3 points. The first one is how Dominic sort of alluded to it. How do SMEs interact with big businesses? Small businesses are the suppliers, the innovators, and the customers of big businesses. So to the extent that some of these large businesses are taking action, that will trickle through, and we can talk a little bit about whether it's trickling through the supply chain initiatives or how larger businesses are promoting innovation. We can talk a little about that a little bit more. So that's the first one. The second one is the extent of opportunities. So we do a bit of a tracking of climate-related startups, and in the last 8 years or so, there has been more than 3,000 companies that you could call as a climate startup, climate tech, if you like. So there has been a lot of opportunities out there, and innovators and startups, which are typically smaller in nature, well placed to capitalize on that. So the kind of opportunity side. And then I think the third angle, which is where many governments are coming in as well, is around how do you transition? We all know that we need to transition to a low carbon economy, but how do we transition? We need a just transition, a responsible transition, a plan that brings not just the big businesses along, but also the people and the small and medium businesses. So hopefully when we discuss with my fellow panelists, we can touch on some of these points, but I just kind of want to set the scene a bit in terms of the key topics that I hope to cover today. So that's a bit from me, Dominic, and maybe let Manjula introduce herself.
Great. Thanks, Liping, and thanks everyone for having me here. I'm coming to you from London, United Kingdom, and it's great to be here and have this discussion. So I'm Manjula Lee. I'm the CEO and founder of Worldwide Generation and the G17 Eco Platform. I've been on a 17-year journey really in search of what is the missing piece of the puzzle to get this. As Liping said, we've been talking about it for decades. We need concrete action. Came from oil, came from the largest oil company in the world, and transitioned into the non-profit sector. I was actually also at the inception of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and was part of the strategy panel to try and find a global resolution to delivering these goals this decade, not next decade, not another 15 years down the road, but now, and the time is now. So we were trying to find what is the missing piece. And I said to the economists around the table, well, what's it going to take to deliver these goals? And they said it's going to be about 2.5 trillion of extra capital per year that was needed on top of what we're already doing. And so, well, the only way that's going to happen is if the proper capital markets play a role and if the private sector play a role. And the only way they play a role is if there's some kind of return on investment. So question number one is, anyone proven the economic argument of sustainability? And they were like, good question, no. And I said, okay, well, that's where we need to start. So in 2016, I started Worldwide Generation, no other agenda, but to find a way to bring government, business, and civil society together to play in the same sandbox together to deliver these goals, and what was in it for them. So went in search of the economic argument, and I started to see data that companies that were aligned to sustainability, whether they knew it or not, were outperforming the stock markets by 11%. By just greening up and de-risking the supply chain and just good ethical business governance, they were doing 14 times more revenue and profitability. The millennials and Gen Z that were coming into the economic power now were going to select brands and leaders that can prove their impact on society and the planet. And this was the big number. If we invested the 2.5 trillion, we would unlock something like 12 trillion global growth per annum, never seen of any generation in human history. Why? At a macro level, you take 3 billion people out of poverty. They're the new consumer market. You solve climate change where we've got 1.5 degrees left. That opens up a whole new market of renewable energy and other types of industries. So I was like, wow, no one's preaching that message, right? It was like a CSR was something you did on the side, and it was high risk, low reward. So I took this data to first the capital markets, at all the banks, the financial institutions, said, look at all this data. If you invest sustainably, you're going to pick the next billion-trillion-dollar companies. What is stopping you from doing this? And they said, right now, sustainability data is coming 12 to 24 months after financial data. Most of the data is data scraped from the public domain, mainly only for public companies, because they're the only ones that do a sustainability report. They get this data, it's 2 years out of date, very little provenance on where that data has come from, and everyone's monitoring and measuring performance completely differently. So they have to buy lots of data sets, put it through their own ESG methodology just to get comparability at a portfolio level. And they said, another thing, Manjula, if you're really going to solve our problem, we really want to know if we invest in this company or project or solution, are we going to move the dial from here to here, which is really impact data. If you can give us trusted, comparable, real-time impact data, we can do our jobs as investors. We're getting ESG ratings right now of companies, in someone's opinion, if they're good, bad, not so good. One company is getting an A+ from somewhere and a D- from same company. And so that was their issue, right? It's like, wow, huge issue for the investors, the decision makers, to unlock that capital and direct that capital. Then go to the companies, and I'm getting to the SME pain. So going to the public companies, private SMEs, micro companies, hey, look at all this data. If you become more sustainable, you're going to be the future leaders of market share. Like, what's stopping you? And they said, yeah, it's a nightmare for us as well. We have to go on all these different portals, fill out all these different surveys, hundreds of questions per survey. Every time we get a new investor and a new survey comes along, we're putting our data on our website that's getting scraped. It's our data, and we just get named and shamed rather than supported of how to improve our sustainability impact. When you take that down to SMEs, they're like, what's SDG? What's GRI? What are you talking about? And they're like, we know it's important because every RFP, every investor round, every even to attract talent, everyone's asking us to prove our sustainability credentials. We have no idea how to do that. The SMEs, Dominic, you said this, the SMEs actually account for the global economy, most of the global economy, yet there's never been any tools to help them, and they've never been catered for. So on a final note, basically boiled it down to three things. No one can execute. Because no one can execute, no one can get access to trusted, comparable, timely data. And because of that, no one can measure impact, where to invest, where to divest, where to manage the risk, and what's actually working for scale up. So these were the three pain points that I realized that's the issue. And we've now been building a platform, technology platform, for the last 5 years as infrastructure to do this. And we're going to, on our way to sort of onboard a nation onto the platform this year. So it's a really exciting movement, and the SMEs is a really, really significant, huge, well, number one, we need to get them moving onto the train. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because they haven't got any of the tools to do so. Thanks, Dominic. Win.
Okay, all right, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So let me introduce myself. So my name is Myo Thu, but you can call me Win if you want to win. So I belong to the, it's a local NGO called Alam in Myanmar. So I'm from Myanmar, but for the time being, I'm taking sabbatical leave from my organizations, and I'm doing some research in Oxford University. So my current research is much more relevant to the climate change adaptation. But here in these sections, I would like to focus more on these mitigation sides, especially, I really look at how these SME can be benefited from such a climate, target we are aiming to achieve net zero emission. So, but in the past, during last 10 years, so I have been leading number of public campaign in my country, In fact, you can call me anti-business, I mean, people, because during the last 10 years, we really, mobilize people to against this sustainable hydropower dam project, as well as we really trying to stop these big coal-fired power plant. They are planned to construct in Myanmar, as well as I stopped, palm oil plantation in my country. So once I had been in this kind of environmental justice movement, I got a lot of blame from other, side of those who are really care about economic, growth. Of course, we also care about economic growth as an environmental group, but what we prefer is a, green economy and, environmental justice. So that's why how, when the world is moving to this net zero carbon emission, target, how these small people can also benefit from such a movement. That's my main interest. Even though my country, as you know, now we have a lot of political problems. So we have a military coup last year, and this climate change, actions are not in priority list, even though we are the highest vulnerable country to a lot of natural disaster. But I'm trying to share my own experience and observation of how, these small business get involved in this kind of, sustainable economic development in Myanmar, and what, lesson we can draw from such a, initiative. So that is how I will be sharing based on our own experience.
Thank you very much indeed, Litping, Manjula, and Win. So I'm sure we can all appreciate we've got some very distinct viewpoints here. So Litping with PwC in Hong Kong, more firmly rooted into the conventional business sphere, but looking at how SMEs can interact with that sphere. We've got Manjula in London, who's looking more at a sort of broader technical execution approach to this, in particular for the smaller businesses. And then Win in Oxford, looking really from the activist side, the sustainability side, and not worried about being anti-business. Tremendous. So, I think rather than asking each person a different question, I think what I'd like to do is just open up and let's talk about policies. Let's talk about what policies, we think at a global level or indeed at a regional level are in place at the moment, and what policies should be in place at the moment, both to encourage, incentivize, and also to disincentivize. And just to get things going, I'm going to ask Litping straight away because we're still on LMW, but we can move the letters of the alphabet around.
Thanks, Dominic. I'll know to watch out for the next question first as well. So I think, you talked about global policies or regional policy. I think what really matters is national or even state level or even sectoral level policies when it comes to the application down to business. In the context that every business that I've spoken with, regardless of size, they always talk that, but this is my local context and I'm operating in my local context and it's different. So there is nuances across geography, across sectors, and what matters to an individual business is what they get hit on. Now we started off talking a little bit about the kind of perspective of large versus small businesses, and I think from a policy perspective, most governments, most jurisdictions, most regulators tend to introduce policies, especially policies that punish kind of higher carbon activities. They tend to hit the bigger businesses first. In fact, like I've done work with a European government where they've looked at the burden of policies, and if you're in a large enough organization, you could be hit by 7 different energy and carbon policies. So where policies are coming in is that they go after the big guys first. So, but how does that trickle down to the smaller and medium sized businesses? And that's where I talk about, the linkage as suppliers and providers of goods and services to the larger businesses. So if a large company is expected to have a zero carbon, zero carbon target, regardless of how that comes about, then what they're going to do is to say, what does that mean from my own operational emissions perspective? And typically, an organization's own emissions, we're talking about 20 to 30% relative to its total emissions. So basically 70 to 80% of a company's emissions are indirect and outside of their operating conditions. So for them to be able to claim anywhere near net zero, they would have to tackle their value chain, which means their ecosystem, which means their suppliers, which means smaller and medium businesses. And that's where I think a lot of the policy flow down will come into the smaller businesses. Your customers asking you to reduce your emissions, or show how you're monitoring your emissions, or tell us if you have a carbon reduction policy, so that they, as your buyer, can also do that bit. So I think that's my sort of first remark in terms of how policies kind of flow to smaller businesses. And I think it goes to what Manjula started to talk about, which is how then do I, as a smaller business with limited resources, and I mean limited resources, both in terms of know-how, both in terms of people, and both in terms and also in terms of financial. How do I react to that, and what can I put in place to react to that? And that's where I think many of the larger businesses that are currently responding to policies, they're grappling with how do I engage my suppliers to work with me on this journey. I know they don't have the time. I know they don't have the people. They may not even know the technical bits of it. How do I help them? And that's where we're seeing a little bit more collaboration between larger businesses and their supply chain. I'll stop there and let my fellow panelists react to that.
Let me just pick up there, Liping. Are you saying that for SMEs, there's a significant risk of their major clients just dumping climate change responsibility on them, and therefore this is a risk area for SMEs that they need to wake up to, or what?
Well, I wouldn't use the word dump, but I would say the word flow through. Right, because if you're getting hit by this, then you need to find a way to address it. And if that emissions is coming from your supply chain, that's where you're going to be working on, right? Yeah. So how does that flow through? And I don't think it would be a direct implication. It's not saying that I have a low carbon target, therefore my supplier needs a low carbon target. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. But it's about how do big businesses engage and interact with their suppliers, so that they can meet their own targets. I think it's definitely a lot more nuanced, and that's where
let's take that concept of being a flow through. So if I'm an SME, in fact, if I'm not an SME in my current job, I'm wearing a suit. In my current job, we find it absolutely impossible to get details. So let me pick up, Manjula. You referred earlier to some of the frustrations that you think people have found, or the mismatches. Just talk through that a little.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about policy, it's usually top down. So the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds usually get sort of asked to disclose this data. That hits the asset managers, the banks, the corporates, the multinationals down to the SMEs, and SMEs are like, I don't know. And so it just goes like this complete vicious circle, right? And so when we talk about policy, it means what you talked about, incentivization or disincentivization. Is it carrot or is it stick? And if I can sort of quote Professor Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, basically with the statement that our economic system is incompatible with human behavior. What does that mean? 95% of our decision making is subconscious. that comes from cognitive biases, programming from birth that we've had, multi-generational sometimes. Those cognitive biases have a default position. The human behavior favors the now instead of the future. It remembers loss more than gain. So if you lost 100 pounds, you'd actually remember that more than if you won 100 pounds. And the third default position is that it favors pleasure over pain. So if we wanted to really create policy, we need to tap into those three things. Climate change has always been something too much into the future. If you're not in the countries where it's affecting you, it's not affecting you. And what COVID showed us was it became real to 7.7 billion people on the planet. And then it's like, oh yeah, there's a bigger tsunami of climate change where if Mother Nature really, lifts its head, it's gonna destroy the planet. And so if we're talking about policy, and if there are any regulators on the call today, it's really about how can we bring the crisis of what we are going to be faced with into the now? How can we use technology and data to make this real for people? Virtual reality, experiential types of immersive situations, so people can understand. Because the human behavior in humanitarian crises, we respond really well, but it's too late. So how do we have preventative? And I think, Dominic, you said the adaptation and mitigation, but actually there's prevention. And the prevention strategy is the best. And so, number one, how do we bring the future into the now, make it real to the individual? Number two is we don't penalize the bad behavior nor reward the good behavior. So there's all these really good organizations and nations doing amazing things, and no one rewards them for that. But neither do we penalize really the bad behavior. And then the third is, how do we make this pleasurable instead of painful? Because right now, if you buy sustainable products, it's more expensive, it's hard, it's marketed green or whatever, but this is the issue. How do we bring pleasure into the now as well? And so those are the three things that every nation, every regulator, every company needs to start to think about, is how do we tap into the human behavior? That's the only way we're going to affect change.
Fascinating. Our conversation hasn't been going very long, and we've already got the word cognitive popping up. Great. Well done, you, Manjula. Well done. Yeah.
Behavioral economics.
Interesting comments. And of course, one of the things you're touching on there is responsibility, which I want to come to later. But let's move on and ask Wynne to weigh in on this sort of subject of policies, because we've got some really interesting stuff coming on here. Yeah.
Of course, as an environmental, activist, I really love to have a legal binding and very effective, efficient policy at the global level, regional level, and national level. Unfortunately, this is not a case yet. Even if you look at the global climate change, it's a volunteer, it's not a legal binding, even in COP itself. So that's why that creates the problem. So you have a different, situations, and I think many of them are enjoying free ride in that global climate change, discussion and discourse. I think in my country, of course, if you look at to the national policy, when these climate, policies are prepared, I think those who are involved in this developing policy, they are not in favor of doing something for their mitigation. So they don't want to take any responsibility, because we are one of the poorest nation in the world, and there's no our problem, and there's a problem or developed country. That's why we don't really highlight at the national level, even though I really want to pay attention. So that's why our policy document is very superficial, very weak. It doesn't really push anything, for taking climate, seriousness on the reducing emission or things like that. Of course, we pay more attention on the climate change adaptation. But apart from the policy, even now we have a political situation, difficult to talk about policy. Who is making policy right now in my country? Nobody knows, because of the political instability we have right now. But what I do care is, apart from that policy, how people perceive on this such a subject, that is more important to me. If people care about it, even we can find a way to start some climate actions in both mitigation and adaptation. This is how we are looking at. But again, of course, these, carbon neutral or decarbonizing, or this is a big flow, I mean, big word for people of my country. But if you properly use the language, maybe, most of the people can accept, especially the SME. Okay, when you have a problem or electricity cut, if you have a renewable energy, it can save your electricity bill, well, that will be okay. And then if you are properly managing your waste, they will be happy. So that's why we need a better language, even maybe the same goal we are reaching in our context, that language need to be applied. In that way, I still have the confidence to say that most of the people will get along with these climate actions. Okay, so that's why, yeah, policy important, but again, how people perceive on the such actions is much more, important, and how we as a a development practitioner, how we will stimulate that one, to do something meaningful for us as well as to the globe. So that's my point to make so far.
Fascinating. So let's just pause at this stage. What are we getting out of this? We're getting the notion that action is being directed on the big people first, and therefore flowing down through towards SMEs. So SMEs, like it or not, are being forced to pay attention to various aspects of climate change. And of course, they all look at it from their own context. And so this throws up the question of how to tackle this discussion. What Win, I think you said, is a language. What Manjula is talking about in terms of positive and negative incentives, the carrot versus the stick. And I would certainly echo that. I find that the tone of discussing climate change it's very difficult to get the right tone. On the one hand, if people tell it like it is, the prospects are sort of so horrific in a way that the natural reaction of human nature is to become defensive, to turn your back on it, and to deny and to not engage. So particularly at a sort of global political level, the debate tends to become very polite and protected, and so that nothing is actually really agreed. It's a tough situation, isn't it? And I don't have a big answer to that, and it's here that I'm going to raise the issue, because we need to tackle it, and some of you have mentioned it, is the whole notion of responsibility. So I mean, for example, I live in Vietnam, and while I'm not Vietnamese, I have a great deal of sympathy for the Vietnamese experience. And no, they don't say this to me, actually. I found it out myself, that Vietnam is 1.2% of the world's population, and it's 0.8% of emissions. And not only that, but it's peculiarly prone to some of the physical risks that we're already seeing of climate change. And I know that around this webinar, and lots of our viewers will be having slightly similar thoughts. So how, responsibilities, how do we tackle that? And I'm going to fiddle around with the alphabet and come straight back to you, Mr. Win. How do we tackle the question of responsibility here, the common language, the balance between carrots and sticks, the need in particular to avoid the tragedy of the horizon, the kicking the can that Manjula was talking about down the road out of our view? How can we tackle that?
Well, in the climate, global climate change, negotiation, we always talk about these common but differentiated responsibility, right? So that's why to be able to achieve our common goal, or again, then how everybody has to take the responsibility depending on their situation and their context. But what I observed in Myanmar, one of the cases I involved is these, some garment factory. So they are connected with their global brand like HMN or other, because to be able to sell their garment to these HMNs, they have to comply with some of the standard that they are, big buyer needed. So I think, they are not happy because I don't know how that responsibility has been shared between this big buyer and the local supplier. But the way we involve is as a non-profit sector, there is one project funded by the European Union, and it was led by the Wildlife Fund. So I was one of the implementing partner in that process. So when I observe these local supplier, they are not happy, even though they are willing to, they would like to sell their product to those big buyer. When they have to change their energy system, waste system, everything they have to follow, it's not easy. Also it's also cost a lot of cost up for them. That's why that may be a problem of sort of sharing responsibility between those global buyer and the local supplier. It's not creating really, level playing fee, quite a good, comfortable for everyone. So even though we are financing for, designing or training or capacity building of, this to those local supplier, but they have to use their own money to change their, energy system or waste system or other, environmental compliance system. So that add up a lot of cost for them. They is taking money out of their profit, right? So they are not, I'm not sure in other countries, they might be taking loan if they get involved in such a, deal. But in our case, we don't have any kind of financial system there. So that's why, even though there's a good thing between, big buyer and the local supplier have a working together for these environmental sustainability, but because of this sharing responsibility is not so, I think, visible or not equitable to me. I think there's not, not going very well. There's one example I want to highlight my experience. That might be, some useful information for others to discuss.
No, because you touch upon something that has been discussed, and I'm sure SMEs will be painfully aware of this. That the that in various consuming parts of the world, the whole creation of greenhouse gas has actually been exported to manufacturing centers. I'm in Vietnam, and I think that's the case here. So in fact, when the pressure rises and the obligations occur, it's sort of, in a way, it's being excessively pushed down towards the production end rather than the consumption end. So this is another angle. So Manjula, have we got any? You're working on this. Have we got any? Any technical solutions? I mean, we've got some involvement ourselves in climate tech, which is looking, but it's sort of early days, it seems to me. How can we tackle this question of responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I've got 3 layers of responsibility that have to work together. The first layer is that to those that much has been given, those are much responsibility is required, and really it's the Fortune 1000 and the G20 countries, those that have thrived and are very prosperous and have generally the largest footprint and have the most responsibility. That's so in terms of that obligation, it's very, very important that they start acting and not just press releases and what they're doing and saying they're doing it, but actually putting their money where their mouth is. And I kind of provocatively want to say that net zero is the wrong strategy, because it should be if net zero is basically you're putting back what you've taken out, but actually what we need is a 10x regenerative strategy of what we're taking out of the planet to put back in and replenish at scale. And I can talk to that a bit later. The second layer of responsibility is that financial accounting, my friend Lit Ping here on PwC had hundreds of years to standardize. We don't have hundreds of years to standardize sort of the sustainability. I don't like the word non-financial reporting, because actually everything is financial, everything is impact. And so we need to kind of standardize this. And the biggest responsibility falls on the standard setters. Right now, it's so proliferated. It's different standards, frameworks, policies, ratings. Everyone's asking the same question, just slightly differently. And when I speak to standard setters, they're like, I go, what's on your agenda? More standards. I'm like, no, like everyone's losing the will to live, like answering these things. Please standardize this. We need to standardize it. And so we've taken on, from a technology perspective, Dominic, we have created a digital taxonomy to harmonize all of this. It's just not working, and we have to move, trains moving. If anyone's got a better idea, great, let's hang the coat hangers on the coat rail and move this along. So that's the second layer of responsibility. Third layer of responsibility, and the most important, is us, the citizens. No point protesting. I mean, love Greta and all those people protest, Extinction Rebellion. It doesn't work. What works is our choice. Our choice is our voice. The brands and leaders we select speaks volumes to the change. So if we stop buying and consuming and investing in these organizations, which we need to demand more transparency and accountability from, that will change. That is our biggest opportunity for change. It's us. And that's the third responsibility. So, if, and a lot of young people feel out, what can I do? I can't really do anything. And I said, I promise you, you start changing your behavior and you start making those different decisions. It will turn massive organizations. It will turn massive nations around. So they're my three responsibilities.
Well, interesting. That last one you talk about, I was recently traveling through London and where you are, and I was very struck by the large number of electric vehicles on the streets, and it's sort of become. I don't know whether that's a carrot or a stick, but I sort of get the feeling that, it's particularly true of
definitely
the younger. Yeah,
they make it easier for you. And
particularly the younger generation. I mean, I've noticed the younger generation, basically in much of Europe, just simply don't bother to get driving licenses. Now I know that's not everybody can survive like that, but they're clearly at the lower end. But when you get to the people, dare I say it, closer to my age, that sort of behavior change, your choice is your voice thing is it's more difficult, isn't it? So, let me ask you, frankly, surely we should be carbon budgeting. Now, can we do that? Can we do carbon budgeting? Do we have the technology? Can we do that?
If we could standardize the data, right now, the way we measure scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 is completely differently, and it's arbitrary depending on the company and their boundaries. And so again, it's about standardization. If we can standardize it and we go, okay, bang for buck, what company is doing what and what's their exposure and how much are they taking out of the planet, then we should be having some kind of incentive well, firstly, there should be a tax to say, okay, this is the penalty of how much you're pulling out. How do you want to not offset it, but how do you want to regenerate it back into society, the economy, and the planet? It needs to be all three. And so that, yes, we can do it. And yes, we can achieve it. And just the final point is that one of our issues around climate change is everyone's looking at life on land, and 70% of the earth is water. And we've all been told, we need to plant 1 trillion trees. Yes, that's great. Except that trees are like adults, don't become useful until they're about sort of 20 something years old and older. and so even if we planted 1 trillion trees today, it will be too late. What we need to do is look below, life below water. And what ASEAN is a blue economy. And actually seagrass and kelp can extract carbon faster than trees from day one. and the circular economy of what it produces is far greater, and just it's a gift that keeps on giving. So we need the data, Dominic, and the measurement to then make the decisions on, okay, where do we invest? Where do we create policies? Because at the moment, we're just all in the dark. We don't know what's working.
Yeah. So that's a good point to come to Lip Ping there. But so basically, what I think you're saying is that it could, in theory, be possible for everybody to have a carbon budget. And just maybe for clarity, because I'm not sure if everybody who's watching us here is entirely familiar with scope 1, 2, and 3. So scope 1 is when you turn on the lights in your building, isn't it? And scope 2, and you get in your car to go to work, or your bus. Scope 2 is what? Scope 2 is just fill us in here on the scope 1, 2, and 3.
I'll let our accountant tell you.
Okay, good.
Let me do a bit of that. So first thing, I think it is possible for all of us to think about a personal carbon budget, and for businesses to think about a corporate carbon budget. And just to give everyone a bit of a kind of flavor of what that means is scope 1 and 2 are basically your own emissions. What I said earlier about the 20 to 30% of all types of emissions that you might be related to, and that involves driving a internal combustion engine car, so driving a petrol car, which is scope 1, and turning on your lights, buying electricity, which would be scope 2. Scope 3 would be your value chain and your supply chain, or things around you that kind of help you function as a business or an enterprise, or as an individual, and typically that is the 70 to 80% of most companies, and I think it. So on the point of responsibilities, this is where I go back to the business context, where what we can control directly, it's about 20 to 30%, a third. And then the rest of it, we need to work with someone else. And it is, to Win's point, how do we balance that collaboration? Who pays for this collaboration, and who get us there? I think that's the tricky bit, and that's where the nuances come in, right? There are some notable business, the Unilevers, the IKEAs, they're willing to invest significant amount of money and effort and time to enable some of those supply chain programs, those collaboration programs that help empower the smaller businesses to get there. But not all companies will do that. So how do the SMEs react then? And I think we talked a little bit about narratives earlier about, is it a cost? The younger generation, the Greta's, youth movement is about, a burning platform. When the climate change narrative started about sort of 15 plus years ago, it talks about the cost to reduce emissions is less than the cost of climate change. And then it flipped to, and then that didn't quite work. The global narrative became of a green growth. How do we have a win-win solution that can empower us, find the opportunities and all? And then right now we're kind of in this mixture of both. There are opportunities, but there are risks if you don't act. There's this decade of action. So the narrative could change over time. But I think, personally, at the end of the day, I feel personally that, it's about doing the actions. It's about actually acting on it rather than the talking. The narrative doesn't matter, whatever takes for you guys, as long as you're kind of doing something about it, right? So I think the narrative, and I think, and if you flip that, if we're purely on the business perspective, on the corporate, whether you're a big business as SME or big business, fundamentally one of the purpose of business is that you're trying to solve a societal problem and hopefully make money out of it, and in compliance with the local regulations or local or sectoral regulations that are around you. So that's kind of, that applies to all kinds of businesses. And in that context, that's where we can think, climate, the topic of climate comes in. There may be opportunities. You may be in a sector that's responding to a positive opportunity to it, right? Or you may be in a sector that you have stringent policies that regulate you, and that's also part of your doing business. And I think at the end of the day, it is about, it's about license to operate as a business, and you no longer can move away from the climate topic. It is part of the license of doing business. So I think that's actually where Win and I do converge a little bit, thinking about where this, and I think that varies for different businesses. Not all businesses have a high carbon footprint or are very subjected to it. So they may have a lower perspective on that, but there will be some that have a higher one. But it is, I think we can no longer run away from the fact that, being responsible on the environmental issue as well as other, social and, agendas, is part of the license to operate as a business.
Yeah, well, sticking on this sort of data point, in my work in Dragon, we've got comfortable with scope 1, and we've sort of broadly got comfortable with scope 2. But the companies, my job is investing. The companies in which we invest, we have enormous problems. In fact, I don't think it is possible really to get estimates for scope 3, and that of course is what we're talking about today is pushing down the supply chain, is scope 3. So, I mean, are you able to comment on that? And maybe I can associate that with another question, which is that your profession, I believe, is getting behind something called the ISSB, right? Or is contributing, the International Sustainability Standards Board. And I'm personally very, very interested in that. So, does that provide some answer, or, how should we all be thinking about ISSB as well, if you could take those two together?
So I think that first on measuring scope 3. So lots of businesses say that that's very hard. Where do I start, and how can I get there? And but I think the challenge is actually the inertia to start. Once you get started, it's not, because basically your scope 3 would be someone else's scope 1 and 2, right? As more and more people work on their scope 1 and 2, we will get gradually a more complete picture. So it's the inertia to start, and once you get started, you will, it takes time to build up that complete picture, but you can start. I think that's the important bit, and people like Manjula and her kind of efforts are helping to make it easier, and that's great. But but I think I would like to dispel a myth. If anything, I could achieve in today's call is that scope 3 is not that difficult to start. You can do stuff about it. The challenge is around accuracy. You may not be super accurate the first time round, but I'd rather be 80% right than 0%, not having done anything. So I think I would strongly encourage all the attendees, all the participants here, if you have done scope 1, scope 2, and thinking, should I do scope 3 or not, explore it, because it's not that difficult. It will be difficult to be 100% accurate, but it's not difficult to make a start. I think that's the first point. And then the second point around the ISSB, that is actually ties very well to what Manjula is saying. We're starting to see a convergence of standards, right? Convergence of reporting mechanisms for businesses, and it will take a bit of time for them to get their ducks aligned, right? But as we get there, there will be more consistent metrics, expectations on what we want to see around all sorts of ESG data. So that's I kind of really encourage the movement of ISSB. The implementation will take a bit of time. The kind of level of granularity or level of precision will take a bit of time, but it goes back to my point, like just because something is a little bit difficult, don't stop it from starting, and because it's not that difficult once you start doing it.
Okay, so that's a constructive view on ISSB, and I think all of us who are watching this, it might be, I believe there's sort of knowledge sharing on ISSB going live, you know, as we're speaking. So that's something that we should all get our heads around, because I certainly have found it's a flipping nightmare to try and keep hold of all the different standards and stuff. And in fact, that leads me to a question for you, Win, which is, so can I just say, we've got a Q&A button here. People are most welcome to ask questions of any description at all. If not, I suggest that we on the panel continue mouthing on for a little while longer until our program ends. But Win, here's a question for you. On that measurement thing, how do you monitor and measure net zero emissions?
Well,
So I'm not quite sure why this is an issue for you in particular, but the questioner directed it to you, Win. So.
Well, that is much more relevant to IT lead bin. So you can, from the sustainability report, we can monitor whether company is really complying. I think especially your scope 3 or whatever, I think talking about how that's had an impact on the ground, you know, socially and environmentally and things like that. Well, there's a long story to tell about that, the methodology on measuring carbon and making sure you have a net zero. So also, I'm not expert on that one. So I would like to provide my, full, answer to that question. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just keep with the question though. Manjula, maybe you've got a view. I mean, one of the things I've learned is, in my company, Dragon, we've been quote unquote carbon neutral, scopes 1 and 2 for, for well over 10 years.
In your investment, or
no,
actually at the portfolio?
No,
your own organization.
Exactly,
okay.
Yeah, because we've only recently been able to get the data, and it's an approximate data actually, bearing in mind Lip Ping's recent comment. Only in the last couple of years we've been able to get the data about scope 1 and 2 for our portfolio companies. But this notion of carbon neutral, and then now this thing of net zero, and then this question of actually decarbonization rather than offsetting. How did all the data and the concepts sort of fit together? And let's bear in mind here, we're talking, of course, from the perspective of SMEs who may not have access to all of the terminology and the advice.
Yeah, so when I figured out the problem of execution, no access to trusted comparable timely data, and can't measure impact, we, for the last 5 years, have been developing this technology platform. So step number 1 was, can we find a way to create a digital taxonomy of the alphabet soup of standards, frameworks, policies? When we tipped all the metrics on the floor, we found 70% were asking the same question, just slightly differently. And more importantly, companies were cutting and pasting the same answer. So it wasn't like we were getting a different data set. So number 1, could we harmonize that and create a digital taxonomy? Second part of the hypothesis was, can we create a way and a tool or an app that could enable, whether you're a micro or a multinational, to come onto the system and collect, process, disseminate, and aggregate your data with provenance and evidence? That was kind of the kind of second step. And what we realized, the step change that companies needed to collect this data, to Lip Ping's point, was, what happens now is some poor person gets lots and lots of spreadsheets from all over their organization, and then they've got to go and clean it all up and then consolidate it, maybe employ a PwC to then create some kind of sustainability report, then share it with their stakeholders, or plug it into all these portals. What we said was, hang on a second, what if we created standardized templates, modules, that we use Databot and blockchain technology under every single metric, which you can decentralize, right? So if you're saying, I want to collect my scope 1, you decentralize that data collection to your stake 1 stakeholders. And you say, hey, give me the answer to these bills, right? Or these requests. that aggregates and calculates your scope 1. You can put your conversion factor of what country you're in, and it automatically, calculates that. The second step is scope 2. Okay, delegate it further to your suppliers, and then you've also got scope 3, which is actually your peripheral, your travel, and not just your employee travel, etc. Right? Your products travel, your and all of that is your scope 3. And so you can basically decentralize your data collection and disaggregate it to aggregate it back up to the organizational level, the head office level. And this is a huge time, cost, risk step change, but it also gives transparency to that organization all the way down the value chain with evidence. And then that gets hashed on the blockchain so that everyone can be sure they're looking at the right golden source of data. So then in real time, we can calculate their social, economic, and environmental impact, and they can share that with the likes of you, Dominic, their investors, their regulators, their internal and external stakeholders in real time, not 2 years later. And you're sitting in the portfolio tracker side of this, looking at this information. That can aggregate it up to your portfolio tracker as an organization in terms of what investment you're making. So everyone's doing the same test. No one's marking their own test, which is another issue. And the third thing is everyone's looking at the same golden source of data. And that's the 3 things that had to move fast. And so that's, and then from the same platform, you can bundle your data and share it with a PwC or a third-party verifier to start getting audit on this data, because that's the other piece is we create a lot of sustainability reports. Some of them are beautiful, 200 pages, and but no one can use them. No one can compare them year on year, and it's just a lot of money and a lot of time, and once a year. We'll actually need to get to monthly.
Printed on really nice paper, which then ends up at the bottom of a bird cage, right? We're all familiar with bird cage lines.
Yeah. And when I love them, I flip through them, that's a beautiful, but where is the underlying data that helped you produce it? And every company, even the most sophisticated, and we all know who the beautiful leaders are, they're like, I don't know. I mean, they're all sitting in some spreadsheet somewhere, and I'm trying to get it, published. But we should be going the other way. Collecting the data and then producing the report.
Yeah, let's a follow-up question here, and it would be good to hear from all 3 of you actually. Again, let's remember we're talking about SMEs, so I've been looking at a business here in Vietnam where the principle of the business, his business is biodigesters, and his target is to hit small scale pig farmers and get them to collect the methane through the biodigesters. So far, so good. But his real thing is that with an IoT, Internet of Things mechanism, he thinks that those farmers will be able to generate I believe we call it a scope 4 emission, right? Which is an avoided emission of methane, which would then become something that they could sell into the voluntary markets, i.e. turning this whole situation through data, through the internet, through decentralizing into an effective mechanism for an SME person. So, to what extent is that concept for all of you possible from where you sit? Maybe if I start, Manjula.
Yeah. I have the pleasure of meeting some of the most powerful innovators on the planet. In fact, I just hosted 38 universities globally from around the world to pitch. It was like I don't know, like an X factor for impact businesses, where they were pitching and we were a global judge with Red Bull Basement. And I mean, we were literally hearing the most mind-blowing innovation on the planet. Now, here's the issue. I spoke to 3 professors yesterday, and we were saying that the issue is that they may be sitting with the best technology and the best idea to save the world. But there's two issues. Number one, there's not enough patient capital allowing that type of investment, those organizations and those SMEs to really grow their business. The second issue, which is kind of my previous world in an M&A, I was an M&A ninja, and really a lot of these bigger companies buy these companies if they're a threat, either scale them up or shut them down, right? And that is the reality of it. And so as an entrepreneur, and I can say this because I am one, you're always fighting that, you know, is the big company going to make my life, you know, hell in terms of market share, because I need to get my innovation out. And two, is the capital there to grow my idea. So that is such a great, what you've just described as this guy, I'd love to meet him actually, but you know, what he's doing is that, you know, that's really the crux of it, the technology and the innovation is there. And the SMEs are the ones that are really going to move the dial, because they're breaking barriers of paradigms of how we've done solutionizing before and in problem solving. And so, but the two things is capital, and number one is the big guys who are really taking over market share. Are they going to allow them to survive and thrive?
Yeah.
So,
okay. Very interesting. Win and Lit Ping, do you have a light to shed on this? While you do on this particular issue, while you do, I think we've got Robert Chong who's watching, and I think he knows that business, and so we could ask him in a minute, Robert, if you're able. I'm not quite sure how to get you onto this Zoom. Do I have to unmask you, or you can come on yourself? I'm not quite sure. Anyway. Win and Lit Ping, comment on this sort of use of, you know, methodologies, technology, decentralization to really provide incentives, carrots at the SME level. What do you think?
Well, let me share. I mean, sorry, Lit Ping.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so last 3 years ago, so I met one of the German businessmen who is one of the biggest shipping company. He owned a biggest company. He came to my country and he is doing his philanthropic work and donating some money to build a community school or things like that. We came across each other and he paid visit to one of the field sites, because I have been helping local community during the last 2 decades. I have been helping local community to be able to establish more than 50,000 forests, community forest. It's a well established. Now it has been, almost 20 years and it's already mature. So he loved it because he wanted to buy the carbon credit from such a, community forest. So he's a direct buyer. So we have a, direct seller, I mean, as a community who want to sell his carbon to this buyer. Again, we are the sort of intermediary. We are, as an NGO, we are the facilitator to buyer and seller to make this happen. Then I try to develop a project and then how that deal can be made. Then what we found is that, of course, we need to have a sort of credit, or certification to make sure that forest really save such carbon then. Well, there is beyond what we can do as as a SME and even as a local NGO to meet that standard, because we have to hire the very higher technical firm or hire the these professors to come and do the experiment and prove that how much carbon has been saved. So this is totally beyond the capacity of what developing country or these SMEs can do in terms of technical, to make sure that it's really safe. And another thing is also, it's also because the buyer promised that, so they will pay such amount. I remember at the time, the government price for this reforestation is less than $5 per ton, but at least he preferred to pay like a $10 per ton. So even we calculate, within 20 years, so they can create almost $20 million of business by selling this. But again, according to the payment scheme that buyer will be doing. But again, there is a need for the initial investment, at least $3 or $4 million. Even though there is an agreement to make budget, who is going to invest on this initial, pay for the initial investment? That means it requires carbon convoy. you know, someone intermediate coming with money and, you know, making investment and, you know, facilitating the deal. But again,
yeah, so, sorry, please.
Yeah, so that's why, as far as I know, there's some carbon credit company based in Singapore or other, but the minimum threshold for them to work as a business is at least 50,000 acres or something. It's a very big. They cannot come and play that role. So even that's why I came across there. Even we have a direct buyer. We, you know, as a small SME, cannot really engage in the business because of these technical requirements as well as those of financial instrument that need to, you know, bridge the gap, you know. So I think that sort of mechanism is very important. At least I really prefer at the ASEAN level, ASEAN should make the effort to create such an initiative to encourage or, you know, or to support some of their local business, especially smaller business, and linking with the global market. You know, that would be one of the mechanisms I really want to recommend here too.
Yeah. So you're saying that that really it's quite difficult in practical terms to do the data, the metrification, the verification. Yes, I hear this quite a lot, notwithstanding. Lit Ping, you know, you're in the business of assurance. You know, give Win the answer to his frustration.
Now, I was only going to echo it to some extent. I think so I just make two brief points because I know we've got about 10, 12 minutes left. The first point is that the growth of the carbon offsets market. Now, I know there is a variation of views on this. Some people, you know, do not like the concept of carbon offsetting because it means that it is diminishing businesses or individuals, you know, ability or willingness to act. But I personally think, from a personal perspective, I think that you know, any action, whether it's you know, paying for someone else to take action now, is good. And if carbon offsetting can help us start the process while we are trying to, you know, do work on our own emissions, I think you know, that is a positive movement. And then linked to that, it does, you know, it is climate change is such a massive problem. We need all the innovation, we need all the different experimentation that comes on board. The example that you gave, Dominic, we need that kind of, you know, thought process and experimentation and piloting to happen for the solutions to come true, right? So that's the kind of the positive side of what carbon offsetting allows. It allows experimentation, it allows new ideas, new solutions to come on board. But then the challenge is what Manjula has already said, the financial and the capital commitment to it, and what Win was saying, the technical ability that needs to make it happen. And I think I'll completely echo what they've just said, but I'll also say the trust point, you know, for the one of the reasons why there is high technical barrier to it is because you need all these technical calculation, you need all this verification, you need all this assurance, but without that, you can't be confident that you're paying for genuine, you know, contribution to that. So unfortunately, they are interlinked. To get that trust, you do need to have that technical rigor, and that technical rigor means higher costs, which makes it more difficult for the finance to get to it. But without the trust, there's no carbon offset market. So those are all interlinked points. And I think what Win was starting to allude to is where can, you know, regulators, where can governments play a role in making trust, you know, I don't want to say cheaper to obtain because that feels wrong, but, you know, how do you build that trust without, you know, making a project non-viable, non-commercially viable? How can you still build trust? How can you look at ways in which you could aggregate, you know, aggregate small projects? How can you look at ways where you can standardize, you know, approaches and terminologies, lower the cost of verification, these sort of stuff? Like, how can you reduce the cost of getting these projects off the ground? I think that's where, you know, it could make a difference. But I'm agreeing with the challenges that Manjula and Win has highlighted.
Thank you very much. I think time's rushing by, isn't it? I think we've got to begin preparing whatever final comments we would like to make. And I think on that question of the metrification, maybe Manjula, you could prepare some final thoughts there. I mean, we've heard it from Win, and do you know, I've come across the same issues, you know, from my perspective. But while we're all thinking about final comments, pick up a couple of points which I think are very, very important that we should, for me, that we should be advocating. So on the question of patient capital, one of the things that we're trying to address is the notion of blended finance and first loss capital. And here I have to point a finger very, very much at the global north here, at the multilateral financial institutions, you know, many of whom are friends, but you know, and most particularly at governments, because that's where, you know, the governments need to give the sign off. It's no good saying that you're going to lend $100 to a government so that the government can take massive technical risk and financial risk. You know, again, you know, and it's a global South government. No, what that $100 needs to be is, it needs to be the last that's paid back. Yeah. And then it has a catalytic effect. So first loss capital, I'd like to register my own, and I wonder whether others agree. And the second issue, and I think this would go quite a long way to address some of the technical issues and the assurance issues, is voluntary carbon markets. So obviously, you know, the compliance carbon market is the one that everybody looks at, but you know, having practical, feasible versions of voluntary carbon that could be decentralized, I'm sure they could be, and then made available to SMEs, to people, you know, with their smaller responsibilities and their smaller opportunities. I think those two, if we don't get those two, I think our job is going to be massively difficult. So final comments, Manjula, on responding to Win's issue and actually Lit Ping's sort of agreement that it is an issue. What would you say?
Yeah, if I can use my final remarks to just maybe summarize everything we discussed today. So, you know, I'm a root cause systemic, holistic systems change problem solver. And if we look at, and we need to then sort of say, well, what is the problem that we're solving? Back to my first comments when I started this conversation was that climate change is actually a symptom, it's not a cause. The way to solve this problem is what the trinity of sustainability, which is social, economic, and environmental. We need social change, economic change, and we then will get that climate change in the right direction. The first step of systemic change is so social. It's us. It's a people problem, right? And how do we, I go back to my sort of 95% of our decision making is subconscious. Where does our decision making come from? From data. Data is information. Information is light. So number one, what data have we got that creates new belief systems, new programs, new decision making that will change us as humans? If we heal ourselves, we heal the planet. It's the truth, right? And the second step is that economic. As I mentioned before, we don't penalize a bad behavior, nor do we reward the good behavior. And actually, all the data suggests that more carrot will move, right? Because we prefer to be in the pleasure state. If we're gaining, so Denmark and other places where they pay people and incentivize them to do the right thing, actually gets better results. You get whole nations turning in the right direction in that way. So incentivizing the good behavior is actually better than penalizing, but we do have to penalize because you feel loss more than gain, right? So that's the second step. Then if you solve the S and the E, as I said, climate change, the environmental, if we start treating each other with respect, if we start treating the planet with respect, well, yeah, we will solve the climate change issue in the wrong direction at the moment and get that down. It's like a human body. You know, if we treat the body badly, we're going to be unwell, right? It's simple as that, even if you don't believe that there's a climate change issue. It's just the truth. If you treat something badly, it will become ill and very sick. And that's where we are today. So the final piece around technology is here now to work hand in hand with humans, not to replace the human. It's actually to work hand in hand with it. And data is the starting point. So one of the really interesting, I think, is carbon the right metric? And I'll tell you why. Because everything in nature has a DNA sound signature to it. By listening to that sound, you can tell where it is, what condition it's in, etc. Even machinery. And the question is, are we measuring the right thing to see how well something is and then in the change it's having in wellness? And so I think the metric should be wellness. The metric that we need to look for is actually, right, the social, economic, and environmental wellness. And the way we can get that is through IoT, satellite imaging, DNA signatory. We can literally take satellites, push them onto something and pull up that frequency. And so it's like, are we measuring, are we solving the right thing? How are we systemically from the root cause solving it, right? Because we can't come back to this again with Band-Aid solutions. And the third is, how are we using technology that's here to collect this data in the first place? And that data has to be trusted.
Wonderful. Look, we've got only 2 minutes left. Note to Sunita, we need another session on wellness and systemic change to cover. Win and Lip Ping, if you can each sum up in a minute.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Over to you. Win, you're on mute.
So at the last minute, I would like to touch on this financial things, because definitely everyone needs finance, you know, to things get done, you know. So I think as far as because I'm not from that field, I mean, maybe there's a question to the Dominic yourself, because you are from the capital fund. Because in my country, there's some venture capital. They're trying to, you know, fund to some of the initiative. But once they prove that the market is feasible and high potential, but there is no such a financial instrument exist. I don't know, not only in my country, but also in ASEAN or other. What about innovative financing? Innovative financing, they also share not only technical risk, but also market risk. They are willing to provide fund to those, you know, inventor for creating something, knowing that even there might be a failure. But again, they also help the market inside. In that way, because many of these climate actions are in that nature, right? So that's right. To me, I mean, very often I came to my mind that, okay, if I have the power, then I will create the enabling environment for the businessman who has the money to run such a innovative financing mechanism, so that so many climate actions initiated by small people and local company can be kicked off to scale it up. So that's why that's my question. Instead, rather than you know answering to the question. Okay, that's my last comment and want to contribute.
Well, excellent. I'll hold that one, and then Lip Ping, tell us how it's all going to happen.
I'll make my remarks very simple because we're running out of time. So I think for all the small, medium businesses listening in, I think if you are in the business of coming up with new solutions, please keep up your good work. I know it's difficult, but you know, the money is starting to flow, the technology is starting to flow, the support is starting to flow, and you know, you're in a great time to be helping to solve this problem. If you're not in that space and you're kind of a more typical small medium businesses, I think start by measuring your emissions, because you've got to measure and you'll be able to manage. It's just don't let the inertia stop you, because I think we're all on this journey together. That's all I would say. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think that's a very practical note to end on, isn't it? And that tallies with my own experience, actually, is, you know, it's so despairing when you look around the world as a whole. But basically, if you just look at what you're doing, you know, as an individual, when you get out of bed in the morning, go to work, do all that stuff, that's the right way to be aware, be conscious of what we're doing, isn't it? Lit Ping, thank you very much. Manjula, thank you very much. Win, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been smashing. Thank you all very much. Is it over to Gary to close down, or yes, good, there we go.
Yes, thank you so very much, Dominic. So good day, everyone, as we are in a number of different time zones today. I'm Gary Theseira, a member of the CGM Council, and it's my pleasant duty to say just a few words to close this session, a big part of which is, of course, to thank you, our viewers, for being a part of this conversations on climate governance organized by the ASEAN Climate Governance Network and Sustainable Finance Institute Asia Sophia. This is, of course, part 2 of a 6-part webinar series designed to empower ASEAN directors and businesses. And as our moderator Dominic said at the very outset, climate change touches everything. So, in fact, only a comprehensive approach that requires a mature sustainability ecosystem will have the maximum impact. And it's always a challenge in a forum like this to cover all the areas of interest to the more than 70 attendees. It's dropped slightly now, but for the most part throughout the session, we've had in excess of 70 attendees. It's a testament to the expertise of our panelists that we have truly covered so very, very many separate but distinct aspects of the SME response to climate change. Of course, different ASEAN member states will have different strengths and different challenges in terms of sourcing sustainable resources, in terms of different levels of exposure and different vulnerabilities. Also, access to human capacity, to tools, and of course, data, which varies not only across ASEAN member states, but also at different sectoral levels. We cannot always be sure about which climate change impacts SMEs will face, whether direct physical effects that affect operations directly, or perhaps pass through from customers or clients, which might increase costs associated with certification, or if the SMEs engage directly in exports, whether they will be exposed to things like border carbon adjustments, or worse, perhaps exclusion from foreign markets. But as we heard from our panelists, both standards, tools, such as calculators and templates, as well as data, quality of data, quantity of data, all increasing at a very rapid pace. So once again, echoing what was said by Dominic, a big note of thanks to Lit Ping from Malaysia, but talking to us from Hong Kong, Manjula Lee, of course, from London. Thank you so very much. Myo Thu from Myanmar, but I understand you mentioned Oslo, so perhaps Norway, am I right?
Oxford.
Oh, Oxford, sorry, not Oslo, Oxford. So in the UK. Okay, and of course, our very able moderator, Dominic, thank you so much joining us from Ho Chi Minh City. Of course, a big note of thanks to the volunteers working in the background to keep everything going. And a big thank you once again to all our participants for all the questions and for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. So once again, do remember this was only part 2. There are another 4 parts, 2 of which will cover the duties of directors, a 5th which will cover the banking sector, and the final one will cover accessing capital markets. So in closing, as ASEAN member states, remember your policy choices matter. As SMEs, your business choices matter. And as individuals, your consumer choices matter. Thank you so very much. Have a good evening.